Hello and welcome. Ambassador Venu Rajamony. It's with great pleasure I welcome you to the fourth edition of Mysuru Literature Festival and the first Virtual Lit Fest. A hearty welcome to you, Mr. Nitin Pai. I'm Shubha Sanjayars, the chairperson of the Mysuru Literary Forum Charitable Trust and the book clubs. Literature. Like an ocean is boundless and limitless. To define it strictly, like the boundaries of an ocean, is difficult. For me, love for literature started at a very young age. As a kid, when I held my grandfather's hand and watched the other grandpa as the chief guest of Sahitya Sammelana, I'm proud to say that seed has sown into a tree now and has blossomed as a Mysuru Literature Festival with the support of my trustees and book club members of the various ones which we run. First Mother Book Club, Kannada Odugara Okuta, Pelican Book Club, Lalita Mahal Book Chapter, Elite Book Club, Authors Book Club, Matru Maitri Book Club, and Reading Habit. This virtual Lit Fest is our digital space where we have had and are having authors join us from all over the world to share their experience and their writing. Today, we have one such multifaceted personality. Over to you, Rayan.
Thank you, Shubha. A very good evening to His Excellency, Mr. Venu Rajamony, Indian Ambassador to the Netherlands, Mr. Nitin Pai, our book club members, friends, and viewers. Ambassador Rajamony is a career diplomat with over 3 decades of experience, a scholar of international relations, and a former journalist. He is the Ambassador of India to the Netherlands since June 2017. He is also the permanent representative of India to the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, as well as responsible for India's relations with the International Court of Justice and the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. Ambassador Rajamony holds degrees in law from the Mahatma Gandhi University and a master's in international studies from JNU. Prior to joining the Foreign Service, he worked as a journalist with India's leading national daily, the Indian Express. Ambassador Rajamony has served as a diplomat in the Indian missions in Hong Kong, Beijing, Geneva, Washington, D.C., and as Consul General of India in Dubai from 2007 to 2010. Between 2012 and 17, he held the prestigious office of Press Secretary to the Indian President during the tenure of President Pranab Mukherjee and accompanied the President on over 100 official tours within India. He further played key roles in the organization and conduct of important functions at Rashtrapati Bhavan, including swearing in of ministers, conferral of the nation's highest civilian and gallantry awards, and conferences of governors and lieutenant governors. Ambassador Rajamony has held other important positions in his long career, which include serving as Joint Secretary and Head of MID in the Ministry of Finance, with responsibilities for formulating India's policies towards the IMF, the World Bank, the ADB, and others. In this capacity, he supervised external assistance to India of about $34 billion spread over 140 projects. He has authored 3 books: India and the Netherlands, Past, Present, and Future; What We Can Learn from the Dutch, Rebuilding Kerala Post-Floods of 2018, and India and the UAE in Celebration of a Legendary Friendship. His widely acclaimed monograph, India-China-US Triangle, a soft balance of power system in the making, is widely cited. Ambassador Rajamony is also fluent in Chinese, French, Tamil, Hindi, and Malayalam. Thank you, Ambassador, for being with us this evening. Over to you, Sam.
The microphone is muted, I think.
Sam.
Yes, right. Good evening to all of you and Ambassador, Your Excellency Venu Rajamony and Nitin Pai and the chairman of our trust and our trustees and members of the book club and audience. I'm extremely happy to introduce Nitin Pai, who is the founder, co-founder and director of Takshashila, an institution and independent center for research and education in public policy. His current research includes the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific, defense economics, and politics of radically networked societies. He teaches international relations and public policy at Takshashila graduate programs. Pai's regular columns appear in Mint, Deccan Herald, and The Print. He is the co-editor of India's Marathon, Reshaping the Post-Pandemic World Order, a collection of essays by some of India's next generation scholars. He was a gold medalist from the National University of Singapore Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, an undergraduate scholar from Nanyang Technical University, and an alumni of National College, Bangalore. Before founding Takshashila, he spent more than a decade as a policymaker in the technology sector. I welcome you, sir, for today's evening, and welcome all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Sam. So those of you logging in from the YouTube, please like and subscribe our channel, and please leave your questions there. Our tech team will transfer them to the moderator. And with a warm welcome to our ambassador, Mr. Venu Rajamony, the screen is all yours.
You are on mute now.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Shubha. Good evening, trustees and all viewers in India, especially those from Mysuru and the neighborhood or from Karnataka. It's a great pleasure to be part of the Mysuru Literature Festival 2020, and I'm deeply honored to be invited to deliver a keynote address on this occasion. I'm grateful to Shubha, chairperson of the trust, as well as all the trustees for having created such an outstanding institution which has successively held 3 Litfests in the past and now goes on to the, like it is in the midst of this online festival. I'm very happy to know that this initiative began in 2015 with just 20 members forming a small book club, but has grown from strength to strength. And I would particularly compliment the organizers for having not given up in these difficult times when the whole world is grappling with a pandemic, but made it a point to go ahead and organize this festival online. Let me say a quick word about my memories with Mysore from the time I was a child, a young boy in school in Thiruvananthapuram in the neighboring state of Kerala. I have visited Mysore. I have fond memories of seeing Brindavan Gardens as a child and being amazed by its beauty. The temple of Ranganatha Swami in Seringapattanam, which is next door, is very similar to the Padmanabha Swami temple in Thiruvananthapuram, where I was born and I had my initial education. I have also been fascinated in my many visits to the city at the contrast between the Mysore palace and the palace of Tipu Sultan, and what interesting figures they were, and the kind of role Tipu Sultan and Hyder Ali on one hand and the Mysore Maharajas on the other hand played in history. That, of course, is a different topic altogether. I also am very proud to say that Arun Raman, a well-known author and business leader, as well as his wife Arun Raman, as well as his wife Afreed Patil, are very dear friends, and they have been our strongest connection to Mysuru in recent times. Both of them studied in university with my wife and me. So I have a number of connections to Mysuru. I have visited the city many times and always enjoyed every visit of mine. Friends, we meet at the times of this pandemic, which has upset the world all over, which has upset every aspect of our lives. And the publishing industry is also one area which has suffered a severe setback because of the pandemic. Publishers, printers, distributors, authors, all are suffering on account of what the world is currently going through. And it is very important to stand up and support them. And I think that is exactly what the Mysuru Literature Festival is doing. I thank the organizers for this. Equally, all the viewers, by coming and participating in an event like this, you are also lending support to the publishing industry as a whole and to everything related to books, to all the stakeholders associated with books. So I would urge you in these difficult times to continue to maintain your support and to support not just the Mysuru Literature Festival, but every literature festival possible and all aspects of the book industry. I personally am, in a way, also a victim because my book, What We Can Learn from the Dutch, was translated into Malayalam and was scheduled for a big release in Thiruvananthapuram with the Chief Minister and the opposition leader and former Chief Minister all participating, discussing the topic of water management. But because of COVID, the whole event had to be called off. This is not just a personal setback for me, but for my publisher, who has invested money in bringing out the book and had faith in the book finding readers and buyers. It was a big setback because the publicity advantage such an event would have provided him was lost. Similarly, my book on India and the Netherlands was ready to be translated into Malayalam, but there too, because of the crisis, the publisher had to put it on the back burner, and the book has not gone ahead. So these are just two small stories from my personal perspective. But for me, it is only a disappointment. There are people whose livelihoods are actually at stake. And it is important that we stand up and be counted in support for them. I remember one of the writers saying, writing is the hardest way of earning a living, with the possible exception of wrestling alligators. So it is for those who live by writing as a profession, they have no other means, and unless books continue to be published, books continue to be purchased by interested readers, and books continue to be circulated and discussed in forums like this, they have no other means. It is extremely important that we as a society, we as a community, stand up in support of publishing industry as well as all its stakeholders. The second point I would like to make in this keynote address is to say, please let us all collectively work to make gifting of books a habit. I have gone through life attending umpteen functions where as a guest or as a dignitary, I have been given all kinds of silly gifts, which I do not know what to do with them. There are these souvenirs which people constantly give, which accumulate and have no long-term value or purpose. And even some nice gestures, whether it be flowers, whether it be fruits, whether it be sweets. Sometimes nowadays people give plants, which is better than flowers, I think. These are our common traditions, I accept. But I think we must look beyond. And gifting, making books the best gift possible under any and all circumstance is perhaps one of the small gestures every individual can do to support publishing, to support books, to support authors, and all those related with that industry. So I would urge on this occasion everyone to try and develop, to cultivate, and to encourage people to make gifting of books a regular, constant habit within India as well as abroad. Thirdly, what I would say is that it is very important to write as well as encourage others to write. I'm not speaking from a pulpit in any manner. I do not think writing is an easy task. In fact, whatever little I have done, I have struggled through it. And everything and anything that I write goes through multiple revisions, multiple changes. It is written, rewritten, redrafted. So it is a very tortuous process, which I remember one author describing it as waking up every morning and wrestling with a 1,000-pound gorilla. Writing is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. It is a difficult task, and therefore the only way to be a writer, to continue writing, is by practicing it every day. Arnold Toynbee has written saying that whether it is anything important or not, whether you need to write or not, every day morning you need to get up and write at least a paragraph or a page. So we need to cultivate the habit of writing, and we need to encourage others to cultivate the habit of writing, especially the children, especially our younger generation. Once upon a time, diary writing was a very regular habit, which I think has been lost in most cases. I do not maintain a diary, and now I regret the many moments in my life when, having recorded every anecdote, every incident of each day, would have been of tremendous help to me later in crafting articles or writing books. And even small pieces for the newspapers or for your magazines, little poems. I do understand and recognize that schools in India do their utmost to inculcate this within children, and parents do support them. But I think we still have not done enough. There is so much talent available in India. There is such a wealth of literature available in India, not just in English, but also in our vernacular languages. I think the world is yet to really discover all the wonderful works that have been made in our vernacular languages. We need to translate them. We need to take them out to the world. And we need to have cross-pollination within India. People from one region writing in a particular language are not adequately known in other regions in their own language, other than through the common languages of English or Hindi. So writing is a task I think we must try and encourage in every manner possible. And as I said, this is something I struggle with. This is something I try to improve upon, I try to work upon. And I hope in the coming days, I will be able to do better and better in this regard. And lastly, and most importantly, I think one of the core civilizational tenets as well as constitutional principles of India is our freedom of speech and expression. Under no circumstance should we compromise on it. We should not permit anyone to dilute that right, that freedom. Attacks on writers, attacks on publishers, burning of books or destroying of books should all be opposed by every citizen of India, every well-meaning individual in the strongest possible manner. Unless we have freedom of speech and expression in our country, the generation of thoughts, the generation of ideas, the generation of critical look at issues and introspection and reflection will not flourish. If creativity has to grow and has to achieve and conquer new heights, there must be freedom of speech and expression. While I understand and accept that all freedoms have their limitations, I think this is a core freedom. This is a fundamental freedom. And everyone who comes for festivals like this, everyone who loves reading books, anyone and everyone involved with books must be at the vanguard for the fight to defend the freedom of speech and expression, as well as to protect writers, authors, publishers, and all those involved in this industry. With these few words, I would like to conclude my keynote address, and I'm very happy to have a more detailed discussion on my books. Thank you very much.
It's time for me to step in. I'm really pleased and thrilled and nervous at the same time that Shubha and the organizers of the Mysuru Lit Fest called me. I'm thrilled because Mysuru is a home to me. So being on the Mysuru Lit Fest is a virtual homecoming. I learned to read, write English, Hindi, and Kannada in Mysuru. So my, my reading and writing, my earliest education comes from the city. But I'm also nervous because it's the city where my parents stay, and I'm sure they're watching this program. And whenever my parents watch me, I have been uncomfortable and nervous since the time I was a kid. So, what I'll try and do is try and shift some of that nervousness and thrill to Ambassador Rajamony, so we can have a very interesting discussion. The topic of this conversation today for the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to talk about writing under the influence of diplomacy, right? So literally the question of how do you have people who are working in the civil service, in the foreign service, how do they write? What is the psychology of writing? What is their lived process of writing? What are their experiences of writing for a general audience when they are in government service? Now, let me preface this by saying, I've come across 4 types of books written by former government servants or, foreign service officers or civil servants or police persons. There are 4 kinds of books. First are memoirs from early stalwarts like Gundevia or VP Menon, which really, tell us a very essential part of our history. They add to our knowledge of history. Second, you have memoirs that are self-exculpatory or self-serving, especially after people retire. They said, look, I'm not responsible for something nasty that happened. Then you have the third kinds of memoirs, which are solutions to India's problems, and which are very well written, very, very forward-looking. And then I look back and think, what were these guys doing when they were in government? They seem to have all the answers when they leave, but they don't seem to have done anything much about them when they are in government. There are reasons for this. I'm being a little flippant here. But the fourth category of books are really works of research and scholarship, which are about accomplishments in culture, arts, and literature. I think these 4 categories tell us a little bit about the dynamics of being a government employee or a government servant and a civil servant or a foreign service officer especially, and writing for a general audience. I just want to leave that as a sort of a construct and ask Ambassador Rajamony to frame the conversation today in terms of, what should we be discussing in the next 40 minutes?
Well, I will look at it from my personal perspective and what I have done. The fundamental difference of what I have done with the kind of books that you have described are that I have written the bulk of the work so far while in service, while most of the other books have been written post-retirement, where you have perhaps a lot more freedom to go into policy issues. For me, my inspiration was my experience as a diplomat, working in different countries, in different cultures, in different societies. It is often, I think, what a diplomat does, or what is the nature of his work, what all comes within the ambit of a diplomat's functioning is often not very easy to explain to people. A lot of people think that we spend all our time attending cocktail parties and engaging in protocol-related activities or alcohol-related activities, but nothing cerebral. But what I have tried to do is to capitalize on that golden opportunity that me being sent as an envoy to a particular country or a particular society provides. And what I already am supposed to do as part of my work, I do that, and along with keeping a mind on how can this be converted into something which provides knowledge, which provides information, and which provides enjoyment to a readership not just from the country where you come from, but also a readership in the country where you live, or an international readership. So any diplomat, when he is posted abroad, one of the first things he does is to start reading upon the country he goes. He starts looking at the history of the country where he goes to. He starts looking at the connections that country has with your own country. He starts looking at what are the vestiges of those connections which are still present in your country. For example, my book on India and UAE, I started off traveling across Kerala, looking for what are the Arab influence, the physical Arab influences that we can still find in the state of Kerala, which actually even comes into the border areas of Karnataka. Similarly, for my book on India and the Netherlands, my current hometown, Cochin, was a Dutch city for over 100 years. And the Dutch presence is palpably present. The best remnants of Dutch heritage anywhere in the country can be seen in Cochin today and in Kerala. So here again, even before going to Netherlands, I started looking at things which would be relevant to me and useful to me as a diplomat. But even as I looked at that, I started thinking, okay, how do we translate this into a book? What information is valuable? How do we present it with pictures? It was always important for me to try and make the book as readable as possible. I put, perhaps because of my journalist background, I put emphasis on communication, the ability to communicate to a lay audience, things that they do not know, much more than advanced scholarship. I will not call these very scholarly books, but they are interesting books, they are entertaining books, they bring information large number of people have no idea about. So even after going to the UAE or after coming to the Netherlands, as I began the exploration of these countries, these societies, started meeting people, talking to them, interacting with government leaders, with scholars, with Indologists, with people who have family connections to India or who have lived in India, who do business with India, slowly a whole picture emerges, a vast canvas emerges. And then the challenge is, what do you put in and what do you take out? Once again, there is so much that one could put into it that it would become completely dry, boring, and nobody will touch it. So this is the process. I throughout my diplomatic postings in the UAE, as Consul General of India in Dubai, and in Netherlands, I worked as a diplomat, keeping in mind the opportunity or the possibility of telling a story. And over the course of my posting, I compiled information, I collated images, I put it all together, and with very able support from my publishers, from my designers, from friends who advised and guided me, from local experts in the bilateral relations, I managed to bring out what I think are beautiful books which tell the story and which are unique and one-of-a-kind books. I can say with great confidence that you will not find another book on India and the UAE as the one I have brought out. And similarly, the India and the Netherlands book is first of its kind, and also the first in English. A lot of material on India-Netherlands relations is in Dutch. And today, it is a very small number of people who can access that information in Dutch. We need to have it out in English so that the whole world can access. So I think my books fall into a separate category. I do not know what you would call this category, but it is translating the diplomatic experience of living and learning about a society, keeping your background and your roots and the connections in mind, and then translating them into books which are full of pen pictures, which tell a story through pictures, just as much as text, which are educative and highly informative and substantive, but yet an easy read. This has been my...
I think we could call it diplomatic anthropology or something like that. You know, it's more in the sense popular diplomatic anthropology. No, but I just want to draw you on to the other, the tension which I have faced, being once a civil servant of a small island republic. There is always a tension between the civil servant in you and the public intellectual in you. Because the civil servant in you or the foreign service officer in you, the ambassador in you has important responsibility in projecting government policy in a particular way, defending it at certain times. Even if you personally don't agree with some of those policies, you're still obliged to defend it. Whereas as a public intellectual, your commitment is largely towards the truth and the public interest, right? And how do you reconcile that? Did you have those challenges when you were writing this book?
Absolutely. I think those challenges exist at all points. And as long as you're in government service, you need to walk a fine line. You need to be careful not to offend diplomatic sensibilities in terms of your host government and their leaders, their public intellectuals, their opinion makers. And equally, you do not want to compromise anything that you're doing vis-a-vis the Indian government. So I took the easy way out by focusing on culture, by focusing on civilization, by focusing on people-to-people relations, and avoiding difficult topics. For example, if the India-UAE book, while I do give importance and mention the role played by Indian workers in the building of India-UAE relations and in bridging the two countries and the kind of hospitality they have been provided in the United Arab Emirates. My book was not an inspection of the conditions of workers there. It was not even a narration of all the measures that the government takes for the protection of the workers or the interaction and the negotiations that happen or the practical relationships that you need to build with the labor department or the police or the employer. So all that is a complex story which I would necessarily have to leave for later. So with each book, you really have to define what is it that you can bring within the scope of the book, what are you seeking to achieve, and what is the best job you can do in terms of achieving that goal. I would just go on to say that the two other publications which were mentioned were in a way very different from these two publications. If I take the book, What We Can Learn from the Dutch Rebuilding Kerala Post-2018 Floods, that was truly an emotional outpouring. I was sitting there in the Netherlands. Kerala was witnessing the biggest floods it had seen in 100 years. The Dutch are acknowledged leaders in water management. Even the United States seeks their support when it is affected by a hurricane or when it faces floods. So I thought I had a moral responsibility to tell the people of Kerala, to tell the people of India, what is it that is special about Dutch? How do they manage floods? How have they managed floods for centuries? And what can we learn from them? So it started off as a detailed article for the press. And once I saw the reception for that article and the amount of interest there was for knowing more about the Dutch example and what is relevant to India, then I elaborated it out into a book. And the India-China-US triangle, perhaps, is the most concrete policy piece, one could call it. And this was a piece which I wrote when I was on a 6-month sabbatical with the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. And I was at the time posted in the Indian Embassy in Beijing as the principal political officer. And all my experience, all the knowledge that I gained working as a political officer in Beijing, in that posting, as well as in previous postings, went into that article, into that monograph in many ways. However, in the writing of it, I tried to make it as clearly academic a piece as possible. I ran it through the government to make sure that nobody has any objections. And I have to say, to the credit of the Indian government, the rules are fairly clear that you can do academic work, provided you put in a disclaimer that these are your views and they do not represent the views of the government of India. And in all these publications, I have tried to also take the ministry and my colleagues in the ministry on board to make sure that none of them have any objections, none of them perceive any diplomatic conflict or tension arising out of something that I write in my role as a diplomatic envoy. And then I have gone ahead and published it. So to conclude, I think there is a role for public intellectuals, and public intellectuals must be scrupulously honest, including being willing to criticize their own country, their own governments, and their own policies. But as a diplomat, when you write books, you must tread a fine line. You are, through the book also ultimately becomes an instrument of diplomacy. The purpose of the book is also to strengthen relations, and you do not want to do the opposite of putting something into it which will lead to a big crisis in relations. And this, I think, perhaps all the three books, the India-China paper monograph came out. It was translated into multiple languages. It has been cited a great deal. It was translated into Chinese. So it has remained in the academic realm, and nobody has really found fault with me for anything that I said in it. In fact, I think having written it in 2001, it foresaw a lot of what is happening today, and it foresaw the discussion and the dialogue which happens. But I leave it at that. It was a minor paper. But the books are truly books which open the eyes of people. The UAE book and the India-Netherlands book, if you show it to an Indian, if you show it to a UAE national, if you show it to a Dutch person, they will look at it, they will read it, or even if they glance through, they will say, wow, I didn't know this. I have been dealing with India for so many years, I had no idea. I've been living in the Netherlands. There are Indians who say, I'm a Dutch citizen, but I have no idea about all this. So that is the impact I have sought to create from the two major works.
Yeah, I have to say something about, I didn't know this when I read the book. The thing about Rembrandt, and I think it's a good opportunity to bring up the slides. So just after this, one of the things which I found very interesting about the book is Rembrandt's inspiration from Mughal miniatures. It's really to realize that somebody like Rembrandt was actually influenced by Mughal miniature paintings and actually sketched a couple of facsimiles of Mughal emperors. That's pretty interesting. So I'll just use that moment for you to, can you just take us through the books? Because I think there are 4 books which you have done. So if you could take us through the 4 and with a short commentary, then we can come back to the Q&A.
Perfectly. So you have already spoken about Rembrandt, but equally I wanted to speak about the cover, which you can see on the presentation in front of you. The cover is actually a painting of Cochin by a 17th century Dutch painter known as Johannes Wingboons, who was the cartographer of the Dutch East India Company. This man never left the Netherlands, but based on reports brought back to him by sailors and captains of the East India Company, he has created beautiful, accurate paintings of various places across the world, including a large number of places in India. And if you go outside Cochin, outside the harbor, the mouth of the harbor of Cochin, you will see, except for some of the buildings which have gone, this is broadly what it still looks like. So this is like the Rembrandt story, which is little known, like Johannes Wingboons, which is little known to both Dutch as well as Indians. The book is replete with stories of different historical characters who have linked our two countries and societies together. It is unfortunate in a way that people in India have forgotten the Dutch connection because of the fact that the British stayed the longest. They were the last to leave. We fought an independence struggle against them. Our consciousness is all full of knowledge about British history, incidents, the battles that we waged against them or the struggle we waged against them. We have completely forgotten the Dutch. And I wanted to bring the Dutch back into Indian consciousness. Similarly, for the Dutch too, they have always seen Indonesia as their primary colony. And they have forgotten the fact that the East India Company was created to trade with India. And I narrate in the book the history of how East India Company was formed, how it was the first public limited company in the world, how there was a gentleman who became secretary to the Portuguese Archbishop of Goa, then rose to become secretary to the governor of Goa, stole all the secrets that the Portuguese had, came back to Netherlands and published it as a book called Itinerario, which became the basic guidebook for all captains and for the Dutch East India Company to defeat the Portuguese and become the major maritime power in Asia, starting with India. Similarly, I talk about a Dutch writer who came to India and who fell in love with an Indian dancing girl called Mamia, a Devadasi, whom he met on the banks of a temple tank in South India, who died saving his life when a boat overturned. And heartbroken, while he had decided to marry her and live in South India, heartbroken, he came back to Amsterdam. And even today, his house in Amsterdam can be seen. I talk about who was the first Indian in the Netherlands. Today, we have the largest Indian community in mainland Europe, around 250,000 people, about 40 to 50,000 from India, 200,000 who have come through Suriname, their ancestors who were taken from India as Indian child labor. But the first Indian, perhaps, can be seen in a beautiful painting in the Rijksmuseum, the National Museum in Amsterdam, a dark-skinned man standing along with a Dutch Protestant preacher called Baldeus, who spent long years in South India as well as Sri Lanka, became a scholar of Tamil and wrote many books. What is interesting and what is little known is that there is a signature in Tamil by this Herit. His full name was Herit Musapatam, meaning Herit from Musapatanam. And Herit is a very typical Dutch name, so perhaps he was given that name by the Dutch, but the signature is in Tamil. And this document can be found in the archives, in the city archives of The Hague. I have reproduced this document here. And I was talking about the Suriname community, which has come through Suriname to the Netherlands. I talk about how the British and the Dutch signed an agreement whereby these people were taken from Calcutta to Suriname, and then how they settled down in Suriname. I also talk about modern day interaction between the Netherlands and India. The Netherlands was one of the first countries to recognize India on becoming independent. The Dutch ambassador was there when Pandit Nehru unfurled the national flag on the ramparts of the Red Fort. But what people don't know is that in 1954, an 8-year-old Dutch child wrote a letter to Uncle Nehru saying, we Dutch children have never seen an elephant in real life. Will you please do something about it? And she appended the signatures of thousands of Dutch children, as a result of which in those days, India used to engage in elephant diplomacy as China engages in panda diplomacy. And an elephant called Murugan was sent to Amsterdam. I have pictures of Dutch children lining the streets of Amsterdam to receive Murugan, Dutch people dressed up as elephant mahouts. And this elephant lived in the Artist Zoo in Amsterdam for 50 years. So these are just a few samples of the kind of stories I have in the India-Netherlands book, and I can go on. I realize I have to be limited in time. But the book I wrote before that, What We Can Learn from the Dutch, Rebuilding Kerala Post-Floods 2018, is to describe the history of Dutch water management and to point out the fact that while even today we in India associate the Dutch with dikes and the building of walls to prevent water from coming in, and they have indeed created large number of engineering marvels, including a gate outside Rotterdam, which is bigger than 2 Eiffel Towers put together. Their philosophy has shifted to living with nature, to building with nature, to creating room for the river. After all their centuries of experience, the Dutch have come to the conclusion that engineering alone will not solve your water problems, that you need to create a strategy which converges with nature. And the most important thing in dealing with any floods is number one, being well prepared and being constantly ready for a crisis to happen anytime. Major climatic events are happening across the world. Extreme events are happening. Either we have too much rain or we have too little rain. Climate change is a reality, and this is going to be with us just like this pandemic is going to be with us. So we need to be prepared at all times. Every Dutch child is taught how to swim with their clothes on, with their shoes on, in case a flood suddenly strikes. So that is the level of preparation they have. While we in India, even if you live on the coast, if you live by the side of a river, nobody tells us, make sure you at least know swimming, let alone boating in the event of a floods. So that mentality of being prepared at all times, and then an ability to create a conscious effort to bring all actors together and to plan for future contingencies. and to prepare, to execute projects which will take care of future contingencies. I said like room for the river. There are a number of projects in the Netherlands which permits at times of floods the water to overflow and go through a different direction. So this is the main message I had to give, that we are not by creating walls, we are not going to stop the floods, but by living with nature, by looking at opportunities to build with nature. Mangroves, which are being destroyed across our country, are the best defense mechanism against floods. They are what can soak excess water and prevent them from coming in. So I talk about those examples which we can learn from the Netherlands. And going back to the India, sorry, do check me if the time is running out. Sorry, voice.
Yeah, what we'll do is I'll bring in the couple of audience questions now, and then we can go back to what we were talking about. I think Jayashri Jagannath has.
Do you want to show those pictures as we take the questions?
Yeah, sure. I think the slides can be kept on. So Jayashri Jagannath says, she's quite keen to know how the families of diplomats cope with the changes of living abroad. And I would add to that is, how do the families of diplomats take to the diplomat also writing? Because it means, from my own personal experience, I know that when you get into the writing mode, it's a massive sacrifice as far as the family is concerned. It takes away the time, it takes away, there are a whole lot of things. I have to keep, right now, I have to keep the dog in one room and the kids in another room and request for silence. How does that work? And especially when you have to do it in a foreign country.
Well, the first part, I think it is tough on families. In particular, it is tough on children. Once upon a time, Indian diplomats, if we take, for example, the children could only go to local schools, which meant you go to a Russian medium school in Russia, Chinese medium school in China, and that was extremely tough upon the children. But progressively, the Indian government has ensured that the best international schools in every capital, every important station is accessible to children of Indian diplomats, and not just Indian diplomats, everybody in the embassy, down the line, from the top down to the bottom, their children can go to these international schools. So it is a great benefit which the government of India gives, and that has equalized the opportunity for education and the access to quality of education. But still, that doesn't make up for the social suffering that happens when every 3 years you're shifting and you're making friends, you're losing friends, you're making friends, you're losing friends. So diplobrats, as we call them, children of diplomats, some have done outstandingly well. Some have faced many difficulties in adjusting to these problems. And similarly for the spouses too. Spouses are asked to play a number of important functions in diplomacy, including entertaining large number of guests, both from the host country as well as people who come from your own country on official visits. So this entertaining is free service they are rendering for the government of India. And it does put a lot of pressure on them. And in a way, the fact that you have to travel and you're constantly on the move every 3 years prevents, it does not give them the opportunity to have a sustained and continuing career in their own chosen fields back home in India. So it is upsetting, it is disruptive, and we all suffer through it. Like I said, life as a diplomat is not all a cocktail party. It is a lot of sacrifice also happens at a personal level. But at the same time, I would say that because of that culture of the family being part of everything that you do, the family being, as a diplomat abroad, as an ambassador abroad, I cannot have my son drink and drive or get involved in an accident, his diplomatic immunity be questioned. There have been incidents of even diplomats killing people as a result of accidents. So every member of a diplomat's family has to be conscious and aware that he is representing India in a foreign country, and he's in a privileged position, and he must always put forward the best face of India, and he should do nothing which is wrong in that society. So because that gets inculcated in people right from the beginning, especially spouses, I think when it comes to a task like writing a book or compiling information, bringing together pictures, you only find them as additional helping hands. And once they realize the importance of what you're doing, it is support that you get rather than complaints.
That's very nice to hear. There's a very interesting question which I've been mulling over also. Champa's question is, why are there so few women diplomats?
Well, I don't think that today we have too few women diplomats. I'm told that from 2012 onwards, all the recent batch of fresh recruits all are virtually 50 to 50%. 50% each men and women. And if we take the total number of diplomats at an approximate of about 980, nearly 20% of them are women diplomats. There was a time when, while women had always had access to the foreign service, the government of India used to demand that if they got married, they should quit. One of our feisty women ambassadors went to the court, fought a case, and got that ruled out. Got that struck down. So since then, there have been a large number of women ambassadors, and I distinctly recall that when I served in the UN, in the Indian mission to the UN in Geneva, and my ambassador was a woman, so many people would come and say, oh, you have such a wonderful, strong woman as your ambassador, and it's nice to see a woman leading the entire team of men. So Indian women officers have done extremely well. They are visible, they contribute a lot, and I don't think many other countries would have, even though the numbers are today only at 20 and not the ideal 50, there is no perception in other countries that Indian women diplomats are lagging behind in any way, or that India lags behind in providing opportunities to women.
Yeah, I'll just take you into that same line, because a career in the foreign service is something which some of the brightest minds must attempt. Career in the government service, for example, Takshashila, one of our endeavors is to get the brightest and the smartest minds in public service. It could be in government, it could be in non-profits, it could be in media, it could be in law. If we don't have the smartest people getting into public service, then our governance structures become that much weaker. So the strength of our democracy, to protect the strengths of our democracy, to protect governance, we need good, smart, talented people to get into government service, foreign service, etc. Now, you have a career in, you started off in journalism and law, and then went on to the foreign service. Now, two questions there. Would you recommend that career path to people now, in the current circumstances? And second, relating it back to the literature part of it, is there a challenge in the writing styles in these three professions?
Well, talking about the career path, let me begin with that. It is my belief that we must have the best of talent in public service, but people should also come prepared for knowing what to expect to the extent possible. It is not possible for everyone to know what is involved in the life of a diplomat, but foreign service is a unique profession and it requires a particular aptitude for it. You could have studied any subject. It's not important whether you studied law or you studied journalism. In fact, the entire civil service system in India is structured in a way that a veterinary doctor or a medical doctor or an engineer has equal opportunity as a PhD in international relations to compete in the exams. And the principle is that anybody who's good in one particular subject who can qualify the exams will be good at everything. So the background is not important, but the aptitude is important. As I said, it is not all rosy. It is not all glamour. You're not sitting there and signing agreements with foreign countries every day. And you have a mix of good postings and bad postings. You have tough challenges. Anybody posted in Kabul would have a very difficult time at any point of time. Anybody posted in Pakistan would have a very difficult time. I lost a very dear friend in a bomb blast on the embassy in Kabul. In many countries in Africa, living conditions are difficult. even in South Asia, there are many issues that you would have to deal with. So you should go with a sense of adventure. You should go understanding that you're going to go into the foreign country, trying to represent what is the best of India, to understand them, to learn from them, to communicate what you're doing in your own country, and to bridge the two countries together. So I think for anyone aspiring for the foreign service, that is what I would consider most important. But going on from there, they're really, the systems have changed so much. I'm 34 years old since I wrote the exam and I qualified. I not only have experience in journalism and law, but I'm also a student of international relations. I studied in JNU, which I would still consider the best department of international relations. And I passed in MA. And the reason I was keen on the foreign service as opposed to the civil service was because I thought I should complement the logical follow through of a study of international relations as the practice of diplomacy. And I really had no hesitation in choosing the foreign service over domestic civil service. And at that point of time, any young man was under tremendous peer pressure. You would see everybody around you, especially in a place like Delhi, writing the exams, competing in the exams. And when you see some people qualify, some people not qualify, you wonder which bracket or which category you fall into. And just by that peer pressure, you do end up preparing for the exams and appearing for the exams. Today, the situation in India is very different. So the advice I would give to a lot of young people, especially because I have also seen a lot of people completely broken and disillusioned because after writing the exam repeatedly several times, they have still not made it. So I would say never keep the civil services as only one focus. Always look at different options which are available. And today there are plenty of options available in India. Even civil society provides us excellent opportunities. Academics provides excellent opportunities. Our business is doing extremely well and going global. Publishing, literature provides opportunities. So there is, for a young man in India today, for a young woman in India today, the sky is the limit. The world is full of opportunities. They should keep their eyes open. They should try everything possible and treat civil services as one amongst many options. If they do have the aptitude, they must, of course, try for it. They must work towards it. But there is no guaranteed recipe for success. I have often got my young colleagues together and I've asked them when they have freshly come into the service as to how many of them went to coaching institutes and how many of them studied on their own. And there again, it is 50-50. So you cannot say going to a coaching institute helps, nor can you say studying entirely by yourself helps. It's a combination of luck, hard work, and your natural talent.
Yeah. So there are two related questions which Jayashree and Niti are asking. In your opinion, what is that thing which makes India stand out globally? What is the one thing which differentiates us from others, in your opinion?
Over my last 34 years in the diplomacy, traveling, living abroad, interacting with the world, I have seen the prestige and the respect that India commands steadily rise across the world. And there are few countries who actually have the image and respect that India has. I've had diplomats in Geneva come and show me the cover of a Time magazine and say, look, my country would never, ever figure on the cover of Time magazine. So our prestige has been growing steadily, and this has been because of our success as a democracy, because our success in terms of our economy, because of our extraordinary human resources. Truly, if there is one commodity in India which is world-class, it is our human resources. And our people who have gone abroad and who have lived abroad have done exceedingly well in whatever society, whatever environment they have lived and worked in. Kamala Harris being one of the most recent examples of a success story in terms of an Indian American or an Indian American family. Her mother moved from Chennai. So it's a combination of factors which has brought India the growing prestige that it has in the world today. I would also add to it popularity of yoga, popularity of music, Indian writers, Indian food, which you now find across the world. India's soft power is also slowly permeating more and more areas of the world. But I think we must be also conscious of the fact that to a large extent, the world sees India as an underperformer. We haven't performed to the full extent of our abilities. And there is much more that we need to do in India. There are many people who come and say, I want India to be a superpower. I disagree with them. I disagree with conscious efforts to be considered or labeled a superpower. I think if we can eliminate poverty within our country, if we can get health and education to every corner of our country, if we can make our economic story a true success story, if we can ensure that our vast, complex, diverse country lives within itself in harmony, protecting the rights of minorities, practicing the principles that its constitution has established, tolerant of differences of opinion, engaging in debate, being the argumentative Indian rather than the violent Indian. That is what we need to do to get more and more international recognition. We will truly be acknowledged as an extraordinary and unique country deserving to be the land of Mahatma Gandhi and Buddha. If we are doing a lot of good things, but if we continue to fix the problems we have back home.
Yeah, that's nice to hear. You know, there's a question from our mutual friend Arun Raman, who says, can you recall one or two very interesting encounters with special people in the course of your career who left a lasting impression? So maybe one such incident would be good.
Well, there are so many people that it is difficult to pick on one, but I am at the moment reminiscing a lot about former President Pranab Mukherjee, who passed away recently. I had the opportunity to work with him very closely for 5 years as press secretary, and then before that 2 years as Ministry of Finance. And what impressed me about Pranab Mukherjee always was his stoicism and his dedication to his work and his responsibilities, irrespective of whatever setbacks he faced in life. I helped him write his memoirs, and in that course had opportunity to have many discussions with him, many personal and intimate discussions, many issues which did not find place in memoirs because he was very particular that his memoirs should not be something spicy or juicy or gossipy, but it should be a record of historical events. But I recall the pain with which he narrated what happened when Rajiv Gandhi came to power. He was number 2 in the cabinet under Indira Gandhi. Immediately after the assassination, Rajiv Gandhi was sworn in, the whole cabinet continued. But after the Lok Sabha elections which followed, when Rajiv won a 2/3 majority, it was Pranab Mukherjee who moved a resolution in the Congress Parliamentary Party asking that Rajiv Gandhi be elected the leader. And that afternoon was the swearing in. And he went back home expecting to be called, as prime ministers do in all democratic societies, and be invited to come and be part of the cabinet. But he did not receive a call at all. And he and his wife sat at home and watched on television, suddenly the swearing in happening and everybody else being sworn in, except him. In fact, he tells the story of how P.V. Narasimha Rao was also very unsure and kept calling and checking with him whether he had got the call, and Narasimha Rao had not got the call. But finally, when the swearing in happened, Narasimha Rao was sworn in. He became part of the cabinet, but Pranab Mukherjee alone was left out. He also talks about how lonely he was after that. He immediately after being dropped from the cabinet, one of the first things he did was to write to the Urban Development Ministry. It is a reflection of his character, and say, look, I cease to be a minister, give me an ordinary house, which is the entitlement of an MP, and take back this ministerial bungalow. Then he flew off to Kerala, where his son was working. And he spent some weeks all alone, introspecting, walking the beaches, traveling the state. But when he came back, what happens in Indian politics, and perhaps even in Indian society, if we look at our cricket stars or our film stars, when the going is good, everybody is praising you, everybody is lifting you up to the sky. When the going gets bad, Suddenly you are the worst villain possible. There is nobody standing by you. You are all alone. So he talks about how he used to sit in the central hall of the parliament and people would be scared to come and even talk to him for fear of being noticed as being Pranab Mukherjee's friend. So that is the kind of painful situations in politics that he has gone through. Yet he never lost hope. He never lost confidence in himself. And he continued to work and he continued to persevere in whatever manner he could till he found an opportunity to rise once again, until Rajiv Gandhi himself brought him back into the party. And then under the Narasimha Rao government, he became vice chairman of Planning Commission first. Then he became commerce minister and so on. So just one small incident, a story. I have lots of stories about Pranab Mukherjee, as well as many others I have met.
Yeah,
And
we'll have to switch to a different topic now, because I think let's try to take a couple of questions in international relations, and I'll give you both simultaneously. You could answer them in whatever order you like. The first question by Kriti is about Netherlands' excellence in horticulture, and does that what can be done to promote more of Indo-Dutch collaboration in the field of horticulture? And the second one is by a mutual friend, Ravi Joshi again. He says, what's your take on the India-China-US relationship as it stands today? And how will it, what's the way forward? What do you think?
Well, on the first question, I think absolutely. Horticulture is an extremely important area of cooperation, and there is much that we in India can learn from the Dutch in the field of horticulture. One of the agreements signed between the two governments is to create a series of centers for excellence across India where Dutch knowledge and expertise can be transferred to Indian farmers. There is a wonderful center for fruits and vegetables already in Baramati, working and very successfully operating. And there are farmers and young people from Baramati who come to the Netherlands regularly for training programs. There are experts who go there. Similar efforts are underway to create another center in Kerala. So there is in principle agreement on these centers, but they are still in the process of being operationalized. It is little known that the Netherlands, despite being a small country, is the second largest exporter of agro products in the world after the US. And this is a revolution they have achieved through the extensive use of greenhouses, especially for horticulture, especially for plants and for fruits, vegetables, and for flowers. And you would be happy to know that in the outskirts of Bangalore, there's already a Dutch company, Rijkswaan, which is operating to try, and they are a seed company, and they try and propagate their seeds as well as the means of cultivating those seeds or using those seeds within protected conditions. An advanced greenhouse of the kind in Netherlands may not be right for us, but protected farming, even if it is a glass house or a plastic house, can bring tremendous benefits to farmers in India. And this is just one example. There are a number of areas where we can learn from the Dutch in horticulture. So this remains a priority area for our cooperation. And I hope more and more people in India will take interest and see how we can bring some of these techniques and knowledge to our farmers so that we can increase our farm production and the farmers' incomes. On the second question on India, China, US, I'm not in a position to comment officially. The foreign ministers speaking on it, the foreign secretary has, I think, today spoken. So I will not go into the policy issues at this point. But I would just like to draw attention to the paper which I wrote in 2001. And my conclusion in that paper, my summary in that paper is, between the three countries, India, China, and the US, there will never be a hard balance of power. Two countries will never ally together against the other. It will always be a soft balance of power, whereby depending on issues, depending on circumstances, depending on international developments, the mutual cooperation and coordination will vary. And what has happened on our borders, it's indeed extremely sad and unfortunate. It is condemnable what the Chinese have done. And you would see that across the press and across the media, there are various calls on what are the options that India should adopt. At the same time, the government has been consistently and very clearly been saying all problems should be resolved peacefully with China, and that is the endeavor of the government. And it has been calling for more diplomatic and military talks to address the situation.
Okay, I was leaving this question for the end. I think we've come to the last couple of minutes. There's one question from Prithvi, and I want to link it to what is you started off with about free expression. His question is, isn't putting pressure on publishers to stop publishing a book, isn't it a violation of freedom of expression? It seems like a rhetorical question, but you might want to address that.
Well, I think in my opening remarks, I made my views very clearly. The freedom of speech and expression is an extremely important right, which is one of the most important rights that we have in India, that people across the world admire India for, and we must do everything to preserve and protect it.
Yeah, I think I think one of the things which we have to be thinking is this is agnostic to ideology. It doesn't mean if Mahatma Gandhi asked to ban a book, it's still wrong. It's not that it becomes right because a Gandhian tells you to do it. Not that a Gandhian would do it, but even if a Gandhian were to do it, it's still wrong. It's still a
and even Mahatma Gandhi himself would not consider him as beyond criticism, right, or as someone who never made a mistake or had no faults, and would have only encouraged others to point out their differences with him.
Yeah, so it's in that sense, the commitment to freedom of expression is absolute. It doesn't mean that if my friends or the people who I like do it, it's right, and if others do it, it's wrong. It's an absolute commitment, and I think that's a very good note for us to conclude this conversation. That which Ambassador Rajamony started off with, is that the duty of citizens today is to ensure that our constitutional traditions, our constitutional culture, the constitutional spirit is protected and taken on to the next generation. On that note, I just want to hand this over back to the organizers. And I thank you all for listening to us for the last 1.5 hours, 1 hour or so, and for giving us this opportunity to be in front of you.
Thank you.
Education is the word. To stand out there and get recognized, be it in our own home or out there in the world. So thank you, Mr. Rajamony, Ambassador Venu Rajamony, for accepting our invitation. And Pradeep Narayan, I'm sure you're logging in from Cochin. Thanks for making this happen for us. And thank you, Nitin, for accepting our invitation and doing such a wonderful job. And thank you, Mr. Venu Rajamony. You gave us such a good sneak peek into the diplomat's life and how you made the book happen. And, so perseverance and the hard work and the luck, everything plays together. And for the students who've been logging in and, there is a college who's going to take the YouTube link to watch it. So for all of them, you've already given enough of confidence for them to keep going and not just feel sad or deprived with one attempt of failure or anything like that. So that has been such a good thought and message to the society.
Thank you, Shubha. If you will permit me one last pitch, let me just tell everyone that my books are available on Amazon.in, and the India-China paper is available freely on the internet. Thank you, Nitin. It was a real pleasure talking to you and having this interaction.
Thank you.